So what are some of the disadvantages, the downsides and drawbacks of globalisation for both high income and developing countries? Let's take a look in this short video. So what about disadvantages of globalisation for high income countries, including countries such as the UK? Well, one issue is job displacement. When companies move operations to lower wage countries, or when competition increases due to the opening of markets, oftentimes workers in high income countries may find themselves out of work and suffering from structural unemployment. So there might be, for example, long-term job losses in industries such as steelmaking or textiles or construction. A second disadvantage is income inequality. There is some evidence, by the way, that globalisation can exacerbate, and that means widen, wage disparities between high-skilled and low-skilled workers. According to the IMF, the share of income going to the top 1% of earners in the high-income nations has increased by more than 3 percentage points since the 1980s, and that's in part due to globalisation. So job displacement and income inequality, two potential disadvantages. And the third one is environmental degradation. Globalisation can have negative externalities, negative environmental effects in high-income countries. One of the big issues, for example, is food miles. The transportation of goods across long distances, as well as the exploitation of natural resources in developing countries, can contribute to an acceleration in CO2 emissions and other forms of pollution. Now, there are potentially many disadvantages of globalisation, but I've picked out there 3 for you. I hope that was useful. What about disadvantages of globalisation for developing or emerging nations? Well, let me again pick out 3. One is economic dependence. One disadvantage is that developing nations might become overly dependent on the export of just a few, a narrow range of key primary commodities or industries, leaving them exposed to external shocks, leaving them vulnerable to fluctuations in global demand and prices. According to the United Nations, commodity-dependent developing countries experienced growth of GDP of just 0.4% between 2011 and 2019, compared to over 3% for other developing nations. A second potential disadvantage is the exploitation of labour. Particularly as multinational companies with monopoly power, they seek to lower costs, they might outsource their production to countries with lower labour standards, lower real wages and poorer working conditions. Indeed, according to the International Labour Organization, there are currently around 25 to 30 million people worldwide in forced labour, many of whom work in global supply chains. And a third potential disadvantage, again, refers to the environment. Environmental degradation. So multinational companies seeking out the cheapest sources of raw materials and production, they may exploit natural resources and increase pollution in local environments. And of course this threatens the sustainable growth of many poorer countries. According to the World Bank, environmental degradation costs developing countries an estimated $5 trillion per year, or about 6% of their GDP. So there we go, 3 disadvantages of globalisation for high-income countries and the downside of globalisation potentially for emerging and developing countries too. Hopefully you found the video useful. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. Take care, see you soon, and stay safe and stay curious.